Hi, everyone. Thank you for listening and tuning in to the Police in America podcast. My guest coming up is Charles Huth. I will call him Chip Huth. That's his nickname. He's a retired KCMO Police Department commander, Kansas City, Missouri. He has over 30 years of law enforcement experience. He has over 40 years of leadership experience. He works with the Arbinger Group. He's a U.S. Army veteran. He is a known defensive tactic expert, and he has authored two books. It was a great talk with Chip and I. I feel like it could have gone for 3 or 4 hours. So I did the best I could to harness some of his knowledge and deliver it to you. I look forward to hearing your feedback. And if you have any other thoughts or ideas on other guests that I should have, please go to policinginamericapodcast@gmail.com. Send me an email and let me know. And with that, without further ado, I give you Chip Huth. Chip Huth, welcome to Policing in America. I appreciate you being here, sir.
Good morning, Tom. Thanks for having me.
So before we begin, I have to share this story with you. It was about 6 years ago. I was tasked with developing a police leadership class at my agency. And I remember my partner, Brian, and I were combing through YouTube and Google and trying to find different things we could add to the class. We stumbled across a YouTube video of some cop out of Tacoma, or at a TEDx in Tacoma. Are you familiar with that video, sir?
Painfully familiar, yes.
I'm going to tell you, we watched it. And typically when we watched videos, we would pause and we would say this and that. We sat and watched. It's 10 minutes and 30 seconds, and there's going to be a link in the show notes. We watched in silence for 10 minutes and 30 seconds, and then it ended. And I looked, and I remember telling Brian, he's in the class from now on. And Brian said, absolutely. And it got to the point, Chip, that you became a member of my team without even knowing it. I feel like I need to give you a pay stub, because we would literally say, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have this discussion, but then we're going to bring Chip in, and then Chip's going to have a talk with them. And we would use your video as that driver. So thank you for that.
I'm curious, Tom, what did you find most helpful about the talk?
I appreciate you asking that. It was as though Brian and I were on this island of trying to figure out how to get policing away from a CompStat output driven endeavor. It was an output driven endeavor. Are the numbers down? Are the statistics down? And we wanted to make it an outcome driven endeavor. And, there were some okay talks there, but yours, some phrases that we quoted you on specifically. I was policing people, not problems. Mm. And then I remember how you shared, the story of the warrant, and how there was one of the members on the team that was making baby bottles, how somebody had ran out and got groceries and brought it back. These were stories that were not heard of, or not in any large part, certainly not on a TEDx stage. And then I loved the phrase that you said. I realized we were hunting criminals with a net, not a spear. And those two things, policing people, not problems, hunting hunting criminals with a net. And you were just capturing all these other things. And then, of course, your dose of humility when somebody said to you, hey, sir, you realize what we're doing isn't working. And you had the humility to tell the world, well, yeah, I know, but we're the police. This is what we do. It encompassed everything we were trying to get to them. That 10 minutes and 30 seconds was foundational for us.
Well, that's quite humbling to hear that. I imagine in your experiences, you've probably seen some of the same things that I was talking about in my talk surface, in colleagues as they went about doing the really tough job of policing in America.
Yeah, we did. I did, myself and Brian, and we used to get teased for doing such things like that. We were silly, but here was somebody of your stature on this platform talking about the benefits of it. It was validating on so many ways. And I just need the listeners to know, you just do a quick scroll of the comments, and the number one comment, this should be mandatory in every academy and roll call room in the country. Like that was 7 years ago. I'm going to play this for police recruits at the academy that I teach. Thank you, sir. And you just scroll down and it is countless people saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. Your impact, Chip, it has resonated like a shockwave throughout the country. You probably don't even realize it. I know you have a certain stature now and a certain name recognition, but I don't think it even encompasses how you have impacted us. So on behalf of our profession, I thank you for that.
Oh, I thank you for the encouragement. It means so much to me. You always wonder if you're making a meaningful contribution, and to hear you say that, it just means a lot. So thank you, Tom.
Well, thank you. Do us a favor, Chip. Give us a short journey for the listeners who might not know you, or my new listeners, or my young cops. Describe a little bit of your journey in policing and how your journey sort of evolved and shaped your current view as to where you are now.
So, I guess my journey with policing starts as a child. I was homeless and abused as a child, and our interactions back then with the police they were profound for us because we started to identify the police with safety and security. They would take my father to jail if he was abusing us. They would get my mother help, mental health assistance, and they would provide shelter for us. We spent many a night in a mission or in a police station when we weren't living in a car and moving from state to state as my dad evaded the law. But we just, my brothers and sister and I identified the police with safety and security. And as a fragile kid who was, scared of his own shadow, I wanted to be tough and formidable like the police. I perceived them to be, protectors, and I wanted to adopt that role. And so from a very young age, the police were role models for me. And I went in the Army at 17 and eventually made it to policing at age 21. And, I more than anything learned in the Army that I really enjoyed working with small teams. And so I wanted to lead a SWAT team. And as I looked around the nation at the time, the largest full-time SWAT team was Kansas City, Missouri. It was 60 full-time members. They had no other task other than doing tactical response work. And so I applied for the KCPD. I got accepted, and I worked my way into SWAT. And just really, it was all I dreamed of. It met all my expectations as far as the camaraderie and the opportunities to learn and grow and the ambiguity that I love so much. It was just every day was like, a chess game.
Hmm.
Couple of critical incidents kind of back to back within my first 5 years, and I was invited to lead the SWAT team for a tactical timeout. I became a firearms and defensive tactics instructor at the behest of then Chief Rick Easley, and I did 4 years there, almost to the day. I knew that in order to get back to SWAT, I needed to get promoted, so I went to college and got some academic credibility, and then I managed to somehow make it onto the promotion list. I was promoted, and in probably within 6 months, transferred back to a special element of SWAT within our department that did high risk search warrants, fugitive apprehension, and high risk surveillance or tactical overwatch on high risk surveillance. And that was their core mission. And we were doing more search warrants than anyone in the country. I think the first year that I was there, we did 850, and I think LAPD did 350. So just really, it's mind blowing because LA, just
Massive.
some of the most professional people there in that team, kind of plank owners in the whole SWAT endeavor, and it was really neat. But again, we had a lot of work, and we ended up. Before I left, I spent a decade there leading that team, and before I left, we ended up whittling that down to 350, which was more appropriate. Probably some warrants that we were hitting, quite frankly, because I've talked to people from LA on the numbers. Some warrants probably didn't require SWAT in retrospect. It was just kind of like it became a habit. If we had a warrant, give it to SWAT. And so we, after this change in perspective that we had relative to the community, we started realizing that, there's no need to be putting a SWAT team in on all of these warrants. We developed a new matrix and a way of thinking about what constituted high risk. That was one of many changes we made. The fundamental change that happened in that team, when I actually was invited to lead it, I was invited to lead it as a hatchet man. The deputy chief at the time, Rachel Whipple, wanted me to go in and clean out this team because they were receiving more complaints in that one 14-person unit than the entire East Patrol Division combined. To the tune of between 35 and 40 official complaints filed and investigated a year. At 70,000 a pop, that's quite a big number for a small team like that to generate. And I went in, naively, self-focused, self-absorbed. All I wanted was to lead a team. So I told deputy chief I could do it, but I had no idea what we could possibly do to take a unit that was doing such kinetic work and make any meaningful progress on reducing complaints. I thought maybe she'd forget about it, or everybody else was judging the efficacy of the team, just like you mentioned with your CompStat comment, by the results we were churning out in terms of seizures. So, well, that wasn't a problem. We had plenty of work. So I went in, I didn't know what to do. And I realized that my attitude, my way of being with that team, my leadership style back then, much like my parenting style, was best characterized as closed distance apply force. The way that I showed up with that team, the situation got worse. And again, my stated mission was to help that team improve, but my super secret mission was to look good to the colonel. And that's what I was most focused on was, and with that inward focus, I couldn't really be effective. Right. So that's, I guess what I'm most known for in the professional space is I had the opportunity and the privilege to lead that team during their turnaround. I don't credit myself for that. I credit the men, and they were all men at the time, who were vulnerable enough and compassionate enough to reconsider the way they were working and the impact that was having on the community at large. They did that work, and I witnessed it. Mm-hmm. And I witnessed a turnaround in that team that is unprecedented. They went from the most complained on team in the entire department to receiving 0 complaints on search warrant executions for a period of time that totaled 8 years.
Wow.
During the first 3 years of that run of 0 complaints, we tripled our gun, drugs, money seizures. So for those people that think, oh, well, you got no complaints because you quit arresting people, nothing could be further from the truth. We actually tripled our results due to the community cooperation we garnered, even the cooperation of suspects who no longer were complaining about the mistreatment they were receiving at the hands of the team. So they were able to talk about the case. They were able to roll up on other folks, work their cases off, to do the more cooperation. So, that's kind of a high level 30,000 foot overview. Yeah. Any questions you have on that, Tom?
Yeah.
Please shoot.
No, I appreciate it. This way, everyone's got a little idea of who's on the other end of the microphone. I had a similar upbringing with you, Chip. I didn't know this until I started doing even more research on you. I, however, was not as impressed with the Chicago Police Department. I think we're similar in age, and I think their response to domestic violence was having the old man take a walk around the block and telling the wife, my mom, stop pissing him off, and then telling me, yeah, of course you're going to get hit. Why are you trying to fight a man? It was a terrible policing. And so my genesis was, I'm going to be better than what I saw. And I wanted to have that protector mentality as well. I will ask you this, though. Many people in that position have a situation. Mine wasn't terrible. The police showed up. They just were ineffective. But many people who have these personal challenges, whether it's income insecurity or housing insecurity, violence in the inner city, they don't look at police as people that are going to save them. Those are some of the hardest relationships to forge and historical traumas to overcome. Why do you think that is? What were police writ large doing that they weren't doing necessarily with you, where you saw them as heroes?
Yeah, well, let me first preface this by saying that the police that I encountered in the 70s didn't handle the situation in the way the contemporary police would either. what would happen is my dad would fight them, and
Oh,
and so they would tune him up, and he'd end up with a hospital stay,
I
or in
see.
a jail cell somewhere for a week or so. They weren't necessarily effective in terms
Mm.
of protecting my mom or us from abuse. Matter of fact, I remember police officers when I was 9 telling my mom, listen, he's your husband, so we can't arrest him.
Right?
Like the line was, because you're married, he has this implied reason or this implied right to beat you.
Yeah.
So that was policing in the 70s in general. That wasn't just your experience in Chicago, I think.
Okay.
My dad, he was tougher than woodpecker lips and really mean. And so it just so happened when the police came to, put a band-aid on the situation, he would fight them. He hated the police.
Wow.
So the times that he got taken in were really for fighting the police, much more than for abusing us. And that
Ah,
was just the nature of the system back then. It
yeah.
hadn't yet, the thinking hadn't evolved. And I'm so proud to see now contemporary law enforcement starting to think differently about so many things. But I wanted to preface that,
I
um,
appreciate it.
because I don't want you thinking that, as we moved up and around the coast and the east and the Midwest, that every police department was just, knocking it out of the park. Now, they were always
Right.
compassionate with us. And,
Sure.
they'd find us living in a car or recycling cardboard from dumpsters for food. And the police officers we encountered in my memory were always very, very compassionate. Now, that's not been the experience of a lot of Americans.
Hmm.
We know that, right? I've talked to millions. Oh, I don't know. That's probably an overestimate. Let's say thousands and thousands of people from all walks
Hmm.
of life in during my career and my journey to learn and understand different people's perspectives. And not everyone had that experience with the police. Our situation was so dire; it felt like that if we just weren't getting hit or
Yep.
or used to steal things, or my dad wasn't betting on us fighting other neighborhood kids in the projects, I felt like we were doing okay. So we had a
I
low
hear you.
bar, right?
Yeah.
But
Right.
to your question, I think the reason so there's not a reason. I
Mm-hmm.
think we really do a disservice to ourselves and others as inquirers when we assume there's like a single reason
Hmm.
why these things go south. There's multiple reasons, and they're very complex. But I think perhaps at the core of it is just our resistance to the humanity of the people that we partner with in public safety. The people that we serve in public safety, like it's so tempting and economical and efficient for us as police to just objectify them, to just
Yeah.
see them as to reduce them to a function or to over identify with one aspect of their reality. And then they lose their humanity in our eyes. And if we can't honor their humanity, if we can't honor the core truth about them, that at some fundamental level of analysis, we're all the same. We all have hopes, needs, fears, dreams, desires. We all have these things. And if we can't tap into that reality and have respect for it and yield to the truth about other people, then every decision we make as police officers is being made in a virtual reality that only exists in our head, a reality populated by objects, not people.
Hmm.
And I think that at its core, that's the foundation for every other problem we have. It's the systematic objectification of other people. And we don't just do it to those we serve. It manifests mostly that way because that's very public and there's a lot of optics there. But we do it to people we work with. We do it to people that we lead. We do it to the people that are serving us our coffee at the local Starbucks, at a Caribou, or wherever you like to get your coffee. We do it to family members, right? I remember as a parent of two teenage boys, I didn't see my sons as human beings. I didn't really see them. I wasn't curious about what it was like to be young men in that day and age, in the early 2000s. I I wasn't curious. As a matter of fact, if they did what they were supposed to do and they got decent grades and they met their curfew, I just saw them as a vehicle to make me look like a good dad. They were a means to an end to support my view of myself as a good dad. a much better dad than I had. And if they didn't obey the rules or they got out of line or they didn't meet my expectations, I saw them as obstacles in my way of looking like a good dad. They were either helping me or hurting me. And if they
Mm.
weren't helping me and weren't hurting me, honestly, they didn't matter. What mattered was that pager or that call out or getting to work so I could constantly validate myself and outrun that image of myself that I had as a young man of being fragile. I was constantly on this treadmill of having to prove I was tough and capable. And I just hardened my heart toward everyone. So I'm saying that to say that it isn't just at work. This problem pervades our experience as human beings. And we as police
Mhm.
carry it into our work where we're given legitimate authority, power, and control over other people, the power to deprive them of their liberty. And we can just come to not value the significance of that because we don't see people as people. I don't know if that's a helpful insight or not, Tom.
It is. It is. And I'm familiar with your work. So of course it resonates with me, but I'm going to pull on it so others understand this, especially the young cops. Because the young cops, I use this analogy. I tell my young officers, look, 25 years ago, there was a bunch of cops doing work in a certain way. Think of them as having dinner at a table. And then the check came and they all got up and they ran out. You sat down at that table and that bill has come due. Now
Mm-hmm.
you have to wear body worn cameras. Now you have to do all these accountability measures that they never had. But they're the ones that cause most problems because you're a much different breed of cop. Just understand they left the bill at the table that you're now paying for because a lot of them don't feel it's fair. It's hard for them to say, I wasn't even alive when Rodney King happened. And, I don't have anything to do with this. And I'm not political at all. And to explain to them, but the people you serve were still there. The people that you serve, that resonates with them. And it's hard for them not to take this personal. So I try to give these ideas, but just so they hear this and they understand, we culturally, and I want to ask you more specifically about police culture, because that is often named the enemy. I hear this phrase, oh, we got to change police culture, police culture. I don't agree, but I'm very curious to hear your terminology and your thoughts. However, when we refer to people as the suspect, when we refer to them as the defendant, or in common parlance, colloquially, the asshole gangster or some
Mm-hmm.
such variants, we do dehumanize them. It's no longer, even when we say teach them in the academy, suspect with your hands up, or step out of the car, driver, whatever it is, it's almost looked poorly to just say, hey, stop. What's your name? Joe. Joe, listen to me. I need you to step out of the car for me, Joe. And just to start building some humanity, they are transactions. And unfortunately, we define good policing with an arrest or a cite or some kind of metric. The cops who are working community groups or community engagement, those aren't cops. They carry guns, but they're not really doing work. So with that, Chip, what do you think with this idea of culture and the culture of the morning watch or, the watch 3 cop that's out there in the alleys hunting, as opposed to, the cop walks around during the day walking the kids to school? Do we have a culture problem in this profession, or is it something worse or less than?
Wow, there's so much packed into that question,
Hmm.
and I definitely don't want to limit the range of our discussion by getting too didactic here, 'cause I don't know everything. I've got a lot of questions, a lot more than I have answers, but I would say culture is such a complex term. Like, in order to answer the question, it depends on how we define it. One way to think
Hmm.
about culture is what behaviors in your organization or practices are accepted and encouraged. That's ultimately your culture. I mean, if it's okay to tell dirty jokes at roll call, that's part of your culture.
Hmm.
If we gas up our vehicles before we hot seat them over to the next shift, that's part of our culture. So culture is very, very complex, right? There are certain aspects of police culture that I think are very profound and meaningful in a positive way. And there are certain practices in police culture that aren't helpful, like many officers that I've interacted with wear cynicism like a badge of honor.
Hmm.
that crusty old, nothing matters, same crap, different day kind of
Yeah.
attitude. So those are both aspects of police culture, but there's so many things that
Yeah.
are happening there. To say that we need a change in culture, I think culture it's an evolving creature. It's always changing. It's
Right.
either getting better or it's getting worse, but there's no such thing as a static culture. What I think that is happening at a pace that quite frankly, the industrial age management mindset that's associated with classic policing wasn't ready to accept is this transparency issue. We need to be
Mm.
accountable to the public. They deserve to know what the police are doing. Like the moose out front should have told you when you pinned on the badge. This is a very, very public profession. I
Hmm.
I got to be honest with you. I hesitate to call it a profession. I call it a practice, and I'll tell you why. There is no one set standard. If the chief of police in Tempe, Arizona, decides tomorrow that he or she wants the force that they're leading to carry flintlocks, there's nothing to say that that chief can't do that. And there
Hmm.
doesn't have to be a consistency between LA and New York or Omaha in terms of the equipment they carry or the way they or the rank structure they have or not. It's so inconsistent. 850,000 police, 13 to 15,000 police agencies, right? So it's hard to call it a profession without having a set of standards beyond constitutional law that we're all to adhere to. Um,
Yeah.
but so I think about it more as a practice. But look, again, I'm getting down into the weeds there. I just think when we talk about changing in police culture, we like to talk kind of in shorthand, like these wholesale sweeping things that need to happen. But ultimately, the change I think is most needed, and I can say this because I've been with members of every major police department in this nation at one time or another, and many of the other medium-sized and smaller agencies. It's really a change in leadership, in the way that we think, in the way that we interact, in the way that we conceptualize the people that we're responsible for and to. All of our relationships with stakeholders, and then especially those relationships with those within the department. If you're coming to work every day and you feel objectified and put upon by your leaders, it's going to be really hard to be motivated to go out into the community writ large and meet them where they're at. I think the mistake we make in leadership, the mistake I've made in leadership, I can speak for myself, is to simply see the people that I'm leading, to conceive of them as chess pieces on a board that I can manipulate to achieve an objective, and not valuing the full range of their humanity. That's the biggest thing. And if you want to call it the police culture, the biggest impact can be made, I think, in that leadership space. I think the men and women that do this job, they're full of potential, and they join this profession. We'll call it a profession for a reason, and we have to help remove all of the impediments that are in their way that are keeping them from fully actualizing their potential. Like we think all the time. I think it was Lewin, psychologist, did some work on behavior change. And what he noticed is people mostly focus on the driving forces. What are the things that we can tweak to help drive people to change behavior? What's the pressure we can put on them to help them or to encourage them, to force them in some cases to change, do something different? What we neglect is the restraining behavior. These things are always working in opposition. There's driving forces and restraining forces, just like there's yin and yo and yin and yang, dark and light, right? There's this, right, this duality. So what we don't often focus on is what is keeping them from doing the things we want them to be doing. What are the restraining forces? We can make more of an impact by removing those than we ever can by increasing the driving forces. So one thing that keeps these men and women that are dedicated to public safety from being their best selves is me. It's me showing up and not honoring that humanity, not getting curious about them as people, and just leading them like they were automatons, and throwing them out there into all this kinetic environment where they're judged and critiqued and evaluated by people who don't really know much about the work that they do,
Hmm.
and they feel put upon. and they feel devalued. I'm the biggest obstacle between them and what constitutes success in contemporary policing. I am. And I have control over that. I can change that.
Okay, great stuff. And I know when we spoke before, you do have this philosophical framework that you process information and then put it back out there. And I enjoy it so much. It sends me on a dozen other questions, but I'm going to stick with the one right now, and it's the leadership. And for the listeners, Chip is a renowned author. Leadership and Self Deception is a book you will often reference, which I have signed by you. And this one of my favorite that I go back to, it's called Unleashing the Power of Unconditional Respect, Transforming Law Enforcement and Police Training. Okay, you and your co-author, Jack Colwell. Let's get into this leadership idea, Chip. I think this is such a subject matter expertise for you. And although I have a dozen questions on other things, let me throw this out there, and then you bat it around a little bit. What I find in policing is we wait too long to start training leadership. We wait until somebody is in a position of some kind of authority, like a lieutenant, and then we send them to command development, or we wait until they're a captain and then we send them to leadership training, when this should be happening early on. So we scaffold them as leaders, but we don't. We teach them to be followers at best. And then we teach our command staff to manage, not lead. So when I love that you said the problem isn't culture, it's the leadership. And many officers would say there's a void in leadership. So two-part, if I can narrow this down, how does the young cop start to develop leadership skills in a hierarchy that is often oppressive in their ability to actually lead? And then two, how do command personnel who have pushed themselves up and now find themselves in these leadership spots, but have never had the opportunity to actually learn leadership, it's too late for them to go back. We're not going back. So how do they start to do this? So you're going to give advice to two cohorts, the young officer that's developing and the senior staff now that find themselves in this Peter principle of the highest level of their incompetence. And now there's nowhere else to go.
Yeah, I think the answer is genuine curiosity. So for that young officer who's seeking development, and I should preface this by saying that I agree with you completely, Tom. We lack imagination when we're boxed off, walled off from the reality of other people. We can't think about forecasting. We should be constantly developing leaders in a pipeline, from day one. Right? There's no super secret leadership training that wouldn't benefit the day one person. Everyone would benefit from effective leadership training. So we should be identifying those people early that want to follow that trajectory and then training and preparing and equipping them gradually and incrementally so that they're able to accept those opportunities and for positional leadership. We should be a friend of mine, Gordon Graham, him and I've had a lot of discussions about this. He's got some great ideas if you want to look into Gordon's work about how to initiate that type of process, how to formalize it. But I'm 100% with you. So, like, if I'm a young officer and I'm feeling like, I really want to be a future leader, what do I do? Curiosity is my best weapon. Challenge my leadership. Challenge them to share, to articulate with me what they know. So if my sergeant comes on a call and makes a decision, then I'm going to debrief that with the sergeant. Hey, Sarge, listen, I'm really interested in knowing your thought process. Like, what went into you deciding to go, with A instead of B? Like, I really want to understand how you get there because I'm interested in developing my judgment and my discretion. And, oh, hey, Captain, listen, I'm a novice here, but I understand that at your level, at the operational level, you have to make fiscal decisions about how we spend our money. We've got so much money and it requires judgment on where we're going to spend it. What's that process look like? Mm-hmm. What would it look like if I came and kind of sat in the back of the room and took some notes at one of these budget meetings just to learn? I'm just so curious. Like, if I could just maintain an attitude of curiosity, just like a kid on a playground where I'm like, the world is huge and amazing. And I want to ask all these questions. I want to learn. I want to listen. If I could do that, I think people would be shocked at how much you can learn and grow. There is wisdom contained within every single person that you meet. And once you value that person as a person, you're open to being taught. And you can learn from anybody at any time. But I would get super curious and then find mentors. And some of those mentors are in books. Some of those mentors are long
Yeah.
dead. There are some great stuff written down, by people who were much wiser than I'll ever hope to be. They did nothing but think about these things and document and write and trial and error. And so read and find someone you can connect with. A good friend of mine, Chris Fussell, is the president CEO of the McChrystal Group,
Oh,
and
sure.
that's General Stan McChrystal's organization. And I mean, Chris introduced me to General McChrystal, and I've had a couple of different conversations with him, and I just was like, oh, I hardly talked the time I spent with General McChrystal. I,
Sure.
I hardly say anything. I'm just simply asking questions. I was in his study and he was showing me some awards and like little trinkets that people had given him, during his different commands. And I'm just like, I've got a million questions. And I'm just trying to I'm trying to
Yeah.
mine this person, this extraordinary leader for every bit of knowledge he had, right? And I've read
Yeah.
his books and I've talked with him. And of course I've talked to Chris, and Chris gets to work with him every day. And I'm just thinking, man, there's so much to be learned here from this person. So you have to be proactive, I think, in seeking that out. And it's the same prescription for the current leaders. But the difference is I have to be humble enough to understand that just because they gave me the bars or the stars, it doesn't mean that's where my journey ends. Leadership isn't a journey with a destination. Leadership is a practice. And I never, ever quit practicing. And I'm constantly evolving in my capacities. I'm constantly getting better or getting worse, always changing, right? But I want to make sure that I'm just like if I'm interested in staying healthy, I've got to put the right stuff in my body. This is the same principle. If I'm interested in growing as a leader, I've got to make sure I'm ingesting and digesting the right content by leaders who are proven to be effective. And I've got to make sure that that my values are in order too, right?
Hmm.
Um, I don't want to follow the teachings of some Machiavellian leader just because they got results in terms of, maybe a profit. There are things bigger than that. Our currency, you and I, public safety, our currency is trust. I want to follow leaders who are experts at building that. So I'll kind of pause there. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, very helpful. You brought up the idea of a little bit of the military, and I want to ask you. Often policing is this adjacent military entity, and you will hear the phrase paramilitary often. And early on, I didn't embrace it. I didn't like it. I didn't like paramilitary. In fact, I always felt bad arresting people. There is a few, of course, you want to arrest. But in general, it's like, my goodness, this person, because I know what the process is. And this is going to be an incredibly challenging endeavor. I am now part of the trajectory of this person's life that has profoundly changed it. And sometimes I'd even feel bad. But the paramilitary mindset sort of tells you to press on. What benefits can the military give law enforcement? And then where do those two entities need to have a very strong dividing line and not embrace one or the other, if you will?
Yeah, that's a very complex question. I'm going to answer it in shorthand. So please
Sure.
forgive me. This is going to be brief. That deserves a lot of attention. But so the military, when it comes to leadership training, I don't know of any other organization that has the volume and quality of leadership training that the military has. I do a lot of work with the Department of Defense, and I am constantly impressed by the intensive effort they put toward leadership training.
Hmm.
Um, we could absolutely take a page out of their book when it comes to providing quality training. Now, look, they still have toxicity in the military,
Hmm.
just like we have in police leadership. It exists, right? Matter of fact, a friend of mine wrote a book called Tarnished about toxic leadership in the military. Um, so I would say that we could definitely learn from the military their focus on leadership. Where do we differ? Well, the military's primary objective is national defense. They're an organization that is trained to leverage violence in defense of our nation. And they they have an enemy that they face. When you go into combat, there's enemy forces that you're contending with. I won't get into the politics of whether we should be where we're at sometimes or any of that. I'm not an expert on geopolitics, but policing, we don't have an enemy. People who break the law, they're not our enemies. They're our neighbors. I mean, I've broken the law. I was driving back from Little Rock the other day, and I looked down. It was 15 miles an hour over the speed limit. You know, I was arrested twice for violence before I was 16 because I was so insecure and fought everybody all the time. I mean, I'm sitting here with you today in this very honored position to be talking to you on this podcast. You know, I'm a mixed bag like everyone else. The people that we're meeting in the public safety space, they aren't enemies. They aren't combatants. We aren't, and this is very controversial, we aren't the line between good and evil. That is not what policing is. We are members of the community that are dedicating ourselves, that are giving full-time attention to public safety. But that public safety, that notion of public safety is something incumbent upon all members of the community to be focused about and interested in. We need to partner with them to be able to achieve this mission. We're not battling against them. And if we were, we'd be in big trouble because there's only 18,000 of us roughly. And there's 360 million people or more in this country. So seeing them as the enemy, conceptualizing them as the enemy is a problem. It's not a problem for the military. It's completely appropriate given their mission in most circumstances, although you will see many things done in the military space that are long-lastingly effective are done in a humanitarian way, behind the scenes. They do a lot of things that to build trust. But look, that's the biggest problem I have with policing is when we seek to adopt what we think of as the military mindset toward our community members. That's a problem. It doesn't mean we don't do harsh things. It doesn't mean that arrest isn't necessary. As a matter of fact, in order for people to take more responsibility, one of the predicates for that is they must be able to experience the natural consequence of their decision. And sometimes the natural consequence of someone's decision is fines or jail. And that's just part of our legal process. Not the best legal process, only the best in existence, by the way.
Sure.
If you don't think so, live in some other countries that are much less tolerant of due process. Believe me. So that's the biggest difference, I think, for us is just the conceptualization that some of us have, that I've had in the past, of the two kinds of people. There's police and everybody else.
Yeah. And in our language. Go ahead, sir.
Oh, no. I mean, you're exactly right. The way that we dehumanize people with our language, perps, suspects, I won't swear on your podcast, but everyone's heard all the little euphemisms we use to talk about people. That just helps us to diminish them. And then that diminishment of another person on my part that's the predicate for abuse. That's the predicate for neglect. The first thing I do is strip you of your humanity. That's what allows me to mistreat and abuse you. Right. So that's the slippery slope there, right? And it could be verbally, it could be physically. We've seen some horrible things happen. Now, I'll end this little rant. I would be remiss if I didn't point this out, Tom, and I think you'll agree with me based on our prior conversations. And I'm not minimizing the problem. I'm not. We do have a problem of abuse in policing. We have a problem of police officers abusing people they're sworn to protect. We have a problem with police officers being judge, jury, and executioner when it comes to, certainly using their personal value system to judge people and the right that people have to have full access to the liberty promised them by our republic. But I have to point out, it is a statistical insignificant number of police officers that are doing that. And now, again, I'm not minimizing. It's still a problem we need to address. but we also need to temper expectations overall. You know, I read something here recently that 2023 was a record year for police officers killing subjects, people out there in the community that were resisting arrest or were somehow engaged in violence, violence with the police. Um, the majority of those people were doing something so dangerous that they needed to have force used against them immediately. And that will never change. As long as people have agency, there are going to be some people who will put other people in jeopardy, and the police are going to be the intercessor in a lot of those. To tell the community we can ever get to a point where the police won't have to use violence is it's really disingenuous.
Yeah.
And to recognize that the police only use violence statistically in less than 1% of all their contacts, which are millions a day, is really something else. Now, on the human side of that, if it's your son or daughter that ends up at the wrong end of a mistake of fact shooting, those stats don't matter, and I appreciate that. I totally appreciate it. We've got to recognize that too. So I think really what we need to be doing is building those strong relationships before crisis happens, explaining ourselves and being transparent, and building that common understanding and the expectation of the public in terms of how we should go about doing our job, and yielding to that more. Like when I mentioned in my TED Talk, you know, there's a difference between policing people and policing problems. When I'm policing problems, I don't see people. But the people in our form of government, they get a vote in how they're policed. And I don't think anyone can disagree with that. So I don't know. I feel like I'm taking us down a different road there.
No, it's good. It makes perfect sense, Chip. There's so many interesting thoughts. Oh, my mind goes wild. The hardest part for me is, you know, I would want to do like a Lex Friedman where I'd keep you here for 4 hours and we would just keep going. But I will say this. I want to make sure everyone hears this point. We talk about paramilitary. That's more for the ceremonial aspects of it and maybe for the rank and structure. The military has an enemy and they're preparing to deal with an enemy. Policing does not have an enemy. They have problems and they're trying to solve problems. So for my young cops and for the newer cops, understand that difference. It's very glamorous. Cops will call themselves gunfighters and they have weapon systems that look like Navy SEALs at this point, incredible, you know, pistols and whatnot. But just to highlight your point on this. Now, I want to ask you this. Oh, so much. I want to ask you this. When it comes to your book, The Power of Unconditional Respect, Unleashing It, you talk about anima-based leadership. Anima-based leadership. Can you talk a little bit about that, how that concept helps us be better leaders, how it could help us with interpersonal skills with the public? How can I explain that to my officers?
Yeah, you know, that term, it's so funny. We published that book in 2010 and now it's 2024. And it's like, there's so many things I would have done differently in that book, right? Because you learn and you grow. And we were looking for a way, we co-opted that term from, I think it was Jungian psychology, anima versus avatar. And so the idea was like, we were talking about just this deep authenticity. What drives me from the inside, what informs my humanity, you know, compassion, you know, my recognition of the commonality I have between myself and the people that I'm serving, versus kind of like this old school idea that I need to put on a face to meet the people I meet. Like there was a big trend in policing when I became a cop, and it extended into the 2000s, that here was the general theme. It didn't matter what internal attitude you held toward people, as long as what you said was professional.
Right. I know the philosophy you're speaking of.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So just put on a nice face. And it doesn't matter if you're totally disgusted by this individual, as long as what you say is professional and nice. And we've seen some examples of this play out on video. It's like you watch the video and the cops, you know, these videos have been shown and trumpeted as the way to do it. And the cops being completely provocative.
Right.
And they're just saying, yes, sir, or no, sir, yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am, in such a way that it's actually inciting a problem, but
Hmm.
they feel totally righteous because they're saying professional language. That was trained to police for a long time. You know,
Yeah.
these quote pieces of crap you're dealing with, just treat them or talk to them respectfully. Well, what
Hmm.
we were trying to distinguish with the term anima was no, actually, how you actually see people matters deeply because
Hmm.
people don't respond as much to what you're saying or doing as they do how they're feeling seen by you while you're saying or doing it.
Hmm.
So it turns out my internal attitude, which comes from a deeper place, what we're calling anima, is the most important thing. And all those other things, what I say or do, are secondary.
Hmm.
Of course, having good communication skills is helpful. And there are great classes on tactical communication out there. But if that tactical communication is weaponized by someone with a heart at war toward their fellow humans, the people that I'm talking with, they're going to ignore the substance and the style, and they're going to pick up on the resentment
Hmm.
and the disdain that I'm expressing. They're evolutionarily equipped to pick up on that that non-spoken message. We know this. Like science has proven it over and over again. Empirically, we know this. Take my SWAT team as evidence. We didn't change one tactic. There were some internal policies that evolved over time, but not a tactic, not a uniform. We didn't change the weapons we carried. We didn't change
Hmm.
our protocol. Uh, what we changed that eliminated those complaints was the way we saw people. They responded not to what we were wearing. Uh, they responded not to our race or our gender. Uh, they responded to how they felt seen by us. And when we started seeing them as human beings, it changed everything. So that's what we were trying to hit at with that term anima. Again, it's again, if we had it to do over again, right? How would we talk about these things in writing? The thing about writing that's so cool, and I encourage anyone listening, write your thoughts down, even if it's in a journal. You do a year of that, you might have a book on your hands,
Yeah.
and it'd be a book I'd want to read. But
Yeah.
I just when you write something and you commit it, you're committed to that. I think every author that you speak with, when they look back on their work, they'll think, "Oh my." Oh my, like I wish I would have known then what I know now, and I would have said X, and that'll keep changing. If you look at if you take some of the prolific writers in philosophy, like Friedrich Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche didn't have a word processor. So if you try to follow some of the problems with following some of that thinking it seems disjointed, right?
Yeah.
Because he's
Yeah.
constantly evolving and thinking and going through these different stages of his life, and his faculties are constantly modulating, and so it's very asynchronous. You and I, when we write this stuff down, yeah, it's like, man, it's my best. That book represents my best thinking in 2010.
Yeah. That's awesome.
So I hope there's still something valuable in there. I always say, I kind of laugh. I say, Jack wrote the book, I drew the pictures.
That's a great, that's a very humble way of doing it. I had the pleasure of having Kansas City barbecue with you, and it is a big highlight for me. And two things I was writing as you were talking, and I still have the notebook. Two things you said that I continue to preach to others, and I'm going to end our podcast with your thoughts, so I don't butcher the eloquence of how you say it. You told me this, Tom. You can't surge trust.
Hmm.
And then there's another one coming after that. So talk to me about you can't surge trust and what you think that means for policing, building bridges, our young officers trying to establish that with the community.
Yeah, I think oftentimes in my experience, when I've been self-absorbed, I've waited until there was a crisis to try to get people to trust me.
Uh-huh.
I've tried to go in kind of post hoc and explain myself. Like, yeah, this is a bad thing, but let me tell you why it happened. Let me tell you how we got there. Hey, you can
Yeah.
trust me. This is my process. You can't surge that. Building trust with people is that whole process is governed by a set of natural principles that I can't interrupt. I can't speed them up. It's like gardening. I can plant the best seed in the best soil, and I can tend it and nurture it. I can't force it to grow faster. it grows at its own speed. I can't yell at it to grow quicker. And it's the same thing with building trust. So trust in my mind needs to be built beforehand. I need to
Mhm.
be working to build trust. Every contact I have with every person in every context is an opportunity to build or destroy trust. I want to constantly be honoring the significance of that contact because then when I need it, when there's that officer involved shooting or we have a scandal on our department where someone's been, you know, not investigating cases like they should or stealing evidence, we have a foundation. We have a. I love the old. I could attribute it probably to Stephen Covey. A friend of mine was his philosophy professor, actually at Brigham Young, and he used this emotional bank account idea. That became very popularized. I love that idea of a bank account. Like I want to have a balance in my trust account so that when we have to make a withdrawal, when I make a mistake, which is inevitable, when I misstep or when I don't live up to an obligation, I've got a balance.
Mhm.
I'm not getting down to a zero or in the negative in my account because we've built that trust. That's what's meant by that term. And again, Tom, look, I that was probably General McChrystal or some other mentor that said that to me. I've got
Sure.
like one original idea, and no one wants to hear it. So
You have plenty. But even if we do, I know sometimes I will say these things and I will later find out someone else said it. But for
yeah,
me, I thought it without their intervention. But I like that because with the young cops, they have to understand. Here's how someone else said this too, and I take it. It's trust is hard to build, it's easy to lose, and it's almost impossible to regain. And the power of that phrase is in the almost. You can regain it. It's almost impossible. And these young cops now have the burden and the privilege of regaining that trust with the
yeah,
community.
yeah.
And I
You
try
can't.
to
Yeah.
go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying you can't talk your way out of a situation you behaved your way into. If I,
Oof.
again,
Yeah.
I just can't. If I've been acting this, going down this path and doing these things, I can't just turn around and say I'm sorry and expect you or anyone to go, oh, okay, clean slate. It doesn't work that way. I've got to actually demonstrate over a period of time in a consistent, reliable way that I'm a different person. My wife and I just had a conversation last night that was very personal, and it was very hard for me to hear some of the things she said.
Mm.
And she said it in such a loving way, but she's a very reserved person who doesn't like she's not confrontational in any kind of a way.
Hmm.
And I knew that I was in a good place with her as far as trust when she opened up and shared a couple things with me very
Yeah.
tentatively that I needed to hear. I'm listening to her and I'm thinking, this is the most important person in my life. And they're seeing this in me and they're trusting me enough to share it with me. And they're giving me an opportunity to work on something that's really significant. And while it's not hurting our relationship now, if this were to continue over a period of time, it would just be chipping away at the trust that we have between one another. It'd be damaging it incrementally, and all of those little dings will aggregate over a period of time. That's how people wake up next to each other one day and go, "I don't know who I married. I don't even recognize this person anymore." It's not like usually. Sometimes it is. Somebody jumps off the cliff into the deep end of the misconduct pool. But most of the time, it's just all of this gradual decline. And when she shared this with me, I'm like, oh my, like it almost brought me to tears because I was like, what does that say about her and I that she trusts me enough to say something like this that could invite defensiveness, that
Hmm.
could invite excuses, that could invite conflict? And I was so emotional about it because I was like, I wish everyone had someone in their life that loved them this way.
Mm.
And what would it look like if I, as a leader, could love the people that I'm leading that way? That I could give them what they need, not necessarily what they want. What difference would that make in their life? So yeah, man, incredible. I'm very, very grateful to have people like that in my life. But if I mess something up, Tom, if I fail to meet an obligation that I make to my wife or my teammates or my partners, you know, I can't expect them, and especially if I've been doing it in a pattern, I can't expect them
Hmm.
to just, you know, wipe the slate clean and oh yeah, no harm, no foul.
Hmm.
No, I mean, if you want to know what matters to somebody, watch what they do. Don't listen to what they say.
It's great. Chip, thank you for sharing something so personal and so emotional on a platform as public as this. And I just want to say, for what it's worth, it's nice for those of us that are still striving to be a Chip Huth, that to know that you sometimes aren't just waking up and doing everything perfect and hitting it out of the park. It helps us to realize there's hope, because
Oh,
many of us see you and we're like, so he gets up, he has the proper amount of carbohydrates, he hits the perfect zone two,
oh,
he does everything as it's supposed to
Tom,
be. So
Tom,
it's nice to know.
I'm lucky to get a base hit some days, man. I mean, I appreciate those things you say about me, but man, I'm on this journey with you, and I'm struggling, and I'm wrong more than I'm right. I'm just trying to figure it out. I'm just trying to surround myself with people who can lift me up. I'm
Yeah.
nothing by myself, man. I am less than nothing by myself. I am so fortunate, and I mean to hear you say people look up to me as an example, it's humbling. I think that word is hackneyed. People use it way too much, but I mean it is very humbling, because I look at it and I'm like, I'm the guy that just can't decide what show to watch on Netflix. I mean, I'm the guy who, I mean, I got to look up words in books that I'm reading. Like, I don't know what that word means, right? I mean, I'm just on this ride,
Yeah.
and I just thank you for saying that. But I know I am more than human, my friend. And there's going to be days that I'm eating the salmon, and there's going to be days I'm eating the frosted flakes, and that's just the way it is, right? So I
Well,
just try to get it right more than I get it wrong. That's the goal.
I uh, I wanted to say, I'm gonna have one more question and we'll wrap up
Yeah,
with this.
yeah.
And I just want to say it's nice to know that there's an image out there of a Chip Huth eating frosted flakes while binge watching Netflix. So that gives me hope. That helps me
You
to
like
know
that?
that I,
You'd like that guy. You'd like that guy.
yeah,
He's got a sense of humor.
absolutely. Well, all of
Yeah.
us that aspire to accomplish what you have are very happy to hear that. Chip, here's the last thing. You told me this, and this is going to be a message to my young cops that are out there who hear this. We had a nice talk, and you looked me in the eye, you didn't blink, and you said, when I asked you this question, you said, well, Tom, the simple answer is the oath has no escape clause.
Mm.
Do you remember a little bit of where that came from?
I don't remember the question,
That's okay. I'm
I
going to give you the reference.
I absolutely 100% remember the statement, because
Okay.
again, it goes back to what I said. Well, let me just go ahead and let you ask
Thank
the
you.
question.
I appreciate. So I was asking it. Look, I'm trying to do this with my cops. It was COVID. It was Minnesota. It was all these things, and my cops were beaten down, and they didn't know where to go, and the mayors didn't like them. And I said, "What can I tell them, Chip? What can I
Mhm.
tell them?" And you looked at me and you said, "Well, Tom, you remind them the oath had no escape clause. When they swore an oath to protect and defend and do all these things, it didn't have a caveat that said, so long as the mayor likes me, so long as all these things are in my favor." And in fact, despite those things, you still go. And I used that phrase to build an entire course, a 2 hour course on how to inspire them. So I'd love for you to say that to these officers, because you're going to say it better than I can. The oath has no escape clause. The young cops they're being told, don't do this job, get the hell out of here. This career sucks. You now have something to say to them. What would you say?
Yeah. Well, first, I'd thank them. I'd express gratitude for their willingness to serve, and we all serve at different levels with different aptitudes, knowledge, and skills, and different motivations and level of competency. We're all struggling to improve. That's the goal, right? For those of you that are listening, um, we take an oath. It's not like uh, an idea or a notion or a suggestion. It's the most, it's the deepest thing we can do. It's swearing allegiance to something larger than ourselves, and we have to just remember that it's up to us. No one can make us compromise that except us. People have the power to influence us externally in all kinds of ways. They can vote down our pay raises. They can raise our insurance rates. They can take away resources we have, uh, but they can't. No one but me can compromise my commitment to that oath. And unless someone puts a gun to your head and makes you take it, that was something you did voluntarily,
Mm-hmm.
and you meant it. By the way, when you took it, you meant it with your whole heart. and you were proud, and you could look at the pictures from graduation day and all the family members, and everybody they threw a party for you, and there were gifts, and people were like so impressed with your commitment. You meant that. Just remember every day that you have to earn the right to protect and serve the people that you're working on behalf of. Like, it doesn't end with that oath. We went into that with our eyes wide open, or at least we should have. And now we have to actually do the work. We have to earn it. Saying the word's easy, but that oath, that compels us to live it out every day and value the significance of every contact and every person you meet. Every person you meet provides you an opportunity to develop your character and to honor that oath. So, Tom, what I would say is, like, there's a reason we have an oath in law enforcement, right? You don't take an oath when you go to work at Kellogg's. And I'm not looking down the Kellogg's people again. Thank you for the gift of your product. But we don't take an oath when we go to Ford. We work at Ford, or for Citrix. We do in law enforcement, and there's a reason, because you have the most power of any other official in a constitutional republic. The only people who can deprive someone of their God-given right to liberty without a trial, based only on reasonable suspicion or probable cause. You have a ton of power. And of course, we've heard it said before, with that power comes a huge responsibility. And our primary responsibility is to honor that oath.
Chip Huth, eloquent words, sir. I appreciate that. I look forward to sharing this with everyone who will listen. And I appreciate your time. I know I will just pop into your text message every so often with a question or a mini crisis, and you're always quick to respond. So thank you so much for that, sir.
Well, you're quite welcome, and I appreciate the gift of your time and having me here. And I just, I'm going to carry this experience with me forward into the work I'm doing. And Tom, look, I will tell you, I know I got a little vociferous there. I would be glad to come back on at some point down the road if you drum up some more questions for me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
I love it. Thank you so much for saying that, Chip. I will be in touch. I will link everything on my page to all your stuff, so it'll all be out there.
Oh, thank you so much.
You got it, partner. Thank you. Good to see you, sir. Hey, go Chiefs. I know you're rooting for them.
Make it a great day.
All right, you too, sir. Bye-bye. Hi, everyone. Sergeant Tom here. Thanks again for listening. I hope you enjoyed the podcast and the discussion with me and Chip. He's such an impactful person in myself and some of the training. I'd like to just leave you with one of his thoughts, and I won't be able to say it as eloquently, but I think it bears repeating. People are people, and when we see them as such, we are much more likely to judge them accordingly. Just remember, despite our differences in the way we see things or in the way we interact with the world, we all have our own individual hopes, dreams, desires, wants, and traumas. And if we start to see each other for the humanity that we share, it could profoundly change the way we treat one another. Thank you for listening.